Hello and welcome to Paradigm Playbook, a podcast for entrepreneurs in the business of sports. Your hosts, Dave Kozak and Steve Cook, are business owners, successful entrepreneurs, sports enthusiasts, avid readers, and longtime friends. For years, they've read every business book on the market and built successful companies with what they've learned. This podcast will give you the critical takeaways in just 15 minutes a week. It's a quick and easy playbook for building a winning sports business. And now, here are your hosts, Dave and Steve.
With all the noise out there, it's hard to know who to listen to. Let us help you reach your business and professional goals. Visit ParadigmPlaybook.com for more information.
Good morning and welcome to Paradigm Playbook. This is Steve Cook. My co-host Dave Kozak is away on vacation, and notice I didn't say still on vacation because he's offended by that, but he's on vacation, and the word is that vacation is exhilarating and exhausting all at the same time, so he's anxious to get back. So next week Dave will be back and we will dig in, but today we have with us Mr. Niall Cummins, our producer, is with us as always.
Great to be here.
And as our guest today is a person very close to me, Bruce Cook, who is my brother living in Scotland. And
here I am.
Bruce has a long career in the business of sports and will give us a little bit different angle on it, but we're going to dig into a couple kind of fun topics. Before we do that, Bruce, you want to give everybody just the Cliff Notes version of your background?
I can do that. First, thanks. I'm honored and a bit frightened to be here, but we'll see how it goes.
Niall's not that bad.
No, you're right. I am in Scotland. We're very close, but very far away geographically. In a nutshell, I've had about a 30-year career in sports, but a little bit different from yours. Mine has been mostly in the commercial sponsorship side of things. Started in events and professional tennis, moved into the Olympic world. Then came over to Scotland and worked in with the NFL Europe League for a while. I ran a professional basketball team for a few years, and then ran the sponsorship program at Scotland's largest and ultimately failed bank. And then spent about 7 years working for a sports sponsorship research company here in the UK. So yeah, I've been around the block a little bit.
So, and we're going to dig into the sponsorship thing and how you keep track of all that. One last question on you personally, and I ask this of every guest. Tell me, who was Bruce Cook in high school? So I want to know, were you the typical jock? Were you the nerd jock?
I was kind of in between. I was the wannabe. I was on the basketball team, on the tennis team, but not a star, not necessarily the most popular kid in class. I was kind of quiet in the background, but always thinking about what was next and what I wanted to be.
And for all of those that that are listening that know me but don't know Bruce, we're a couple years apart age-wise, and so we skipped a lot of age. And I claim that in my family that the athletic talent also skipped me over. So I had a father that was very athletic and kind of best in class. I had a brother that could do a little bit of everything, and I have a son that is extremely gifted and talented in sports. And the best I can say is I try hard. So that's where we go. But we've both spent a career in sports, love sports as fans, as business. It's no better place to be. We believe in the value. And I want to go back to a podcast we had at some point. Now you can look it up, when we talked about accountability. So there was a podcast that Dave and I did talking about accountability and how important that is in running an individual sports business. And I know, Bruce, in your work in sponsorship, and a little bit that I've done on the corporate side, on the other side of sponsorship, there's always an ask, well, did you get your value out of that? So there's a measurement, a way of measuring it. Did you find it now? When did we No. Anyway, so let's talk about accountability first. So in a sports business, as an entrepreneur, obviously accountability is profitability. That's got to be one of your.
Yeah.
How many different goals or objectives is realistic in any business, sports, corporately, or small entrepreneurs?
Well, I think it's interesting because I only really started thinking about this in the context of sponsorship, and especially in sponsorship measurement when I was running some major rugby and tennis sponsorships. And laterally, when I'm working in the research world, I'm helping lots of other clients measure their sponsorships. And it's really the same for any business, any strategy. You have to know. It goes back to the old adage of you can't hit a target that you can't see. So you got to know what you're trying to do. Everybody asks the question, what does success look like? And that's the same thing with sponsorship or strategy for your small business. I'm in the process of starting another small business right now. I won't go into the detail of that, but I'm thinking about those things too. Your question was how many objectives should you have? You've got a vision and you've got a mission. Your objectives, and when I'm guiding a client in sponsorship, it's anywhere, it ends up around 3, but it could be 1 and it could be 5. If you start to get more than that, you start to dilute your focus. But I think the magic number is somewhere around 3. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I know that we go into most businesses when I'm consulting with them, and I don't know that this is a good objective, but there's always this objective of breaking even, of getting, so they don't start into the business saying what's our return on business going to be? What's our return on sales? In the corporate world, we don't have a conversation without talking about ROS, the return on sales. That's how much you make on it. In sports businesses, we tend to talk about how many students we have, that we are breaking even, how many. We talk about gymnastics all the time because it's my life. We talk about how many, level 8, level 9, level 4, how many in our preschool program. So we talk about numbers that way. We don't normally talk about a profit percentage.
Yeah, and I think that's largely because, especially in most smaller businesses, especially in the sports world, they are passion projects, and the entrepreneurs involved in it are not in it first and foremost to make money. They're in it because they love it. And the reason you need to break even is for the overall sustainability of the project, is because you can't keep doing what you love doing if you're losing money consistently year after year. So to me, the profit objective has to always be there, but it is more of an enabler for the other true objectives, and which are linked to the passion and the vision of the project from the start.
It's interesting you use the word enabler, because I see the other side of it as well, where I'm dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'll start talking about profitability and how we're going to grow this. And I often hear, well, I'm not in it for the money. And I try to make the case that if you're not in it for the money, you're in it for the students, the customer, the sport, the activity, the community, any of those things. And in reality, the more money you make, the more you can do of that. So money is still a controlling factor and an enabler of all your other missions. And I think sometimes we neglect profitability a little bit because, we're proud of what we're doing, and we kind of just focus on, as you were saying, the passion that got us into this. Whether you're running a dance school and your passion is the ballet, that's all well and good. And can an objective be the number of children that actually perform in a ballet, or aside from just the number of students?
Absolutely. I mean, when you start looking at your vision for what you want that business or project or facility or whatever it is to become, when we talk about a vision, and that's what it is, it's something you can see in your mind, but you can't see it in front of you yet. So you have a vision for it. And if your vision is for it to stay exactly as it is, well, then you're there. You're not aiming for anything. But if your vision is to make this ballet school or gymnastics club or whatever it is bigger, happier, more impactful, more effective, or whatever, then there are steps along the way or milestones that you might want to hit, and they become, in general sense, your objectives, and in specifics, your KPIs as you look to hit those, because you see those as, you don't start by taking your first step to the finish line. It's one step at a time, and you run a 10K race and you've got mile markers, and you feel good every time you cross one. And so that's what this becomes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, so mile markers is kind of a good analogy. That do we have mile markers in our business? We tend to, we had a conversation with a gym owner of an MMA gym, and it always gets around that, how many students do you have? How many do you want? How many do you think you can handle? And it's those numbers. Although we're trying to grow the sport, I don't know that we set KPIs based on the growth of the people within the business. Should that be a focus for us, or should we stick to the number that we can bring into the business and not necessarily how they're growing within the business?
I mean, that all comes back to why you're in the business. And you have to, I think, to me, there's a big part on any strategy about the process. And it's when you're setting out those objectives, if it's just to make a profit and you really think about it and that's all you're in it for, well, then that's going to define how you do things. And you might not end up with a great experience for your customers. But if you're really in it to have an impact, you've got to understand that from the beginning, and you're going to have most likely multiple objectives toward reaching your mission. But you've also got to have the conversation about where do these objectives rank. We talk about profit. If it truly is just an enabler, another word you could use for it is an accelerator. Uh-huh. If you just turn enough profit to pay the bills and stay where you are, yes, you can keep doing what you're doing. And that's fine if your vision is to continue to be just a small going concern of a business. But if your vision is to grow, then if you can increase profits more, that's more money that you can then invest back into the business to do more marketing, to add more equipment, to expand your premises, to do whatever those things might be. So I think your objectives have to be in line with your vision and your mission.
So if you take vision and mission, and we've had numerous discussions on that, and I wholly believe in that. I think part of that vision is an exit strategy that says, where are you going to leave this? Do you want this business to go on after you? Do you want it to be saleable? Do you want it to be inheritable? During COVID, I worked with a lot of businesses that ended up shutting down, liquidating assets, and moving on. And I think maybe there was never a goal with KPIs that were leading to how you're holding yourself accountable to grow that business so that it can be run after you're gone.
If that matters to you, and some people would be happy to close it down when they're done because all they cared about was being involved in it in the first place. Some people, want to see it going on because it's having an impact on the community. So that becomes really important. They want to leave a legacy. That might be a a personal goal of the owner. Alternatively, you might want to make it as profitable as possible because you want to sell and exit with profit that you want to do something else with that money. Mm-hmm. So I think it goes back to it, and it's important that in those early stages when you're setting out that vision and creating those objectives, that you're not just on an island with those by yourself. There are other key people involved in your business, I assume, and they've got to be brought in on the process. I often tell a story in the sponsorship world. Hopefully, got time for a little tangent here, but
sure.
We were in a meeting with a major client. This is when I'm working in the research world, and we're talking about sponsorship strategy. And I won't say who they were, but they were a brand you all know, a luxury brand based in Switzerland who spends hundreds of millions on sponsorship. And we were laying out a proposal to take them through this process of looking at objectives and setting the weightings on those and the KPIs, because we were going to provide all the measurement that went into that data analysis for them. And so we mocked up what we kind of guessed were their objectives for getting involved in sponsorship or spending all the money that they do. And we put up 3 objectives. And I said, we guessed that these are your objectives. I'm not sure what they were. Brand awareness, brand perception, might have been dealer engagement or something like that. And we put up the 3 objectives, and there were 3 of them there. And they said, yeah, that actually looks about right. So, okay, good. We're on the right track. And the next step we took was we said, and then we've applied what we believe are the weightings, what you think is the most important. You've got 3 objectives there. We think this one's probably more important than the other 2. And I forget, we said one's 50%, the other's 30 and 120. And the first person says, yeah, that's actually pretty close. And then the person next to them says, no, wait a minute. I would put this one above that one. And It just struck me. I said, you're spending over $100 million or pounds a year on sponsorship, and you've not yet had this conversation because you're not on the same page. You think objective B is more important, and you think objective C is more important. And it just shows you that this happens at every level. But if you can have those conversations, no matter how big or small your business is, in the early stages and get everyone on the same page, you're not going to have the problems down the road. I'm amazed at how much that problem continues to happen in the sponsorship world, but probably in a lot of business today.
Yeah, and dial it back to our level of small business. We're talking with entrepreneurs that, and I'm going to say businesses range in gross revenues anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million, but there's many in that range. And there's a misunderstanding amongst even owners, but definitely among owners and high-level employees. And I'll say key employees. In the sports world, we don't normally refer to them as managers. We'll have, a head coach by division, and the head coach kind of oversees the other coaches. But you'll have an owner that is in it to generate profit, have a legacy-based business that can go on beyond them. And then you'll have a head coach that is geared up on how many elite athletes they have. So I have a baseball coach in my business at Grand Slam that can tell you how many of their kids, players that they've coached have made it to college or made it to the major leagues. They are not KPIs of mine. I don't track those. So I have a totally different perspective. And I think it hits on this imbalance you're talking about. My KPI is tracking how many of the kids that walk in the door for a baseball lesson actually ever play on a full-size baseball field. Baseball, and that was originally a retaining customers goal of mine. If I kept them to age 13, and in baseball, if those that don't know, which is probably most of Scotland, people
Most
that
of
don't,
Scotland doesn't know what baseball is.
yeah, and they don't care.
Yeah, those that do don't care.
But in the U.S., you don't go onto a full-size baseball field until you're 13 years old. So if we get a student at 6 years old, we start baseball at 4, but if we get them at 6, then I want to retain them for 7 years. So that is a return per student that we're tracking. Now, because I'm in it for business, I have a passion for baseball, but I have probably more of a passion for business. So it has to be profitable in every phase of the business. Or I shouldn't say that. The phases of the business have to average out at profitability.
Yeah.
So when you're tracking, I'm interested about your weighting. So tell me a little bit more. If I want to get kids to a big field, I want to make a profit, and I want to leave the business to my family, so the business goes on beyond me. As you get older, I think legacy becomes more important. I think personally, I start weighting legacy higher, and maybe profitability goes down a little bit just based on age. I don't know if that's true of everybody, but that's kind of me.
If you know a coach, teacher, or business owner who could use our help, please refer them to us. We appreciate your support.
Yeah. Well, then my next question would be, okay, of those 3 objectives, which one's the most important? And whether we answer that question today, you start with that, and I would have this conversation and think this through before you get into KPIs. Too often people say objectives, boom, KPIs, and they're right there setting their targets right at the beginning. It's like, wait a minute, let's dial this back a little bit. Let's get everybody on the same page, because if you're talking about Grand Slam, and fortunately you've got the business side of it, profitability, and the retention side of it, get every kid onto a full-size baseball field. I think those are 2 objectives that are in sync with each other, because if you can get every kid onto a baseball field, that helps the bottom line of the business. But I think your purpose in that is as much for the kid as it is for the business. And that's where you've got a good opportunity, because those 2 objectives come together. But when you're looking at any 3 objectives and you get into weighting, I think that's where you've got to have that conversation about what's the most important. And you put the numbers against it just because that forces you to have that conversation. Because there's going to come a time when you've got to make a decision on something. And, if you and your managers at Grand Slam or any gymnastics club or facility have to make a decision, it might come down to, this is a 50-50 split in our mind, but you know what? Objective A, we've said, is our number 1 objective. So even though the next objective is important, A has to take priority. So that helps you make a decision, helps everybody understand that. But it also, that conversation around weighting helps you pull out the way other people in your team feel about the business. So if you have any discrepancies, any things where people are out of sync, that conversation brings that to the surface so that at the very least you can be aware of it. You don't have to change everyone's mind, but you might have people that are of different mindsets.
Yeah, I get that. And I have no adverse reaction to helping a ball player get to college, so I'm not against that. It's just not what's in my head. So how do you develop KPIs for some of those intangibles, or can you?
Yes, you can develop KPIs for anything. But you have to be aware of what's the scoring system going to be. There's some KPIs, you want most of the kids that leave your place to have a smile on their face. Well, you're probably not going to take a picture of every one of them as they walk out the door. Maybe you can analyze your CCTV, but you're probably not going to do that. And it's going to be a gut feeling. You might decide, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to survey all of the staff, on a regular basis, as to what's the attitude or the mood of the customers or something like that. But I think even if your KPI is a yes or no question, did we do this? And can we back that up? Even if it's anecdotal, it can still be a KPI.
We've talked numerous times on the corporate level about, brand perception, things like that. But how do you measure, if I'm running a gymnastic club, how do I measure brand perception or brand recognition? How do I do you survey customers? Is it a mail out survey and do you do MailChimp? Or I'm just looking for a way that we can give our listeners something that's concrete, that if their goal is to become better known in the community, how do they figure that out?
If you want to be better known in the community and that's going to be your goal, then you've got to find a way to ask that question. It might be, you can hire a professional researcher to do it, or you can do, I don't know who your audience is, but it might be going out to the local summer festival in the area or whatever, and, taking a clipboard around and asking people, which of these sports facilities have you heard of?
I've seen that at events where people are walking around asking questions. And I think Disney does a little bit of that as well.
There's a famous one. Remember the Innocent Smoothie Company?
No, tell us.
Maybe they're a British company. I don't know. These were guys that had good jobs, but they had started this sideline of making these smoothies, and they were setting up their smoothie machines and selling them at summer festivals or whatever. And they would sell the smoothies, and then they had 2 garbage bins there. And the question above is, should we quit our jobs to make smoothies full time? And they had a yes bin and a no bin, 2 garbage cans. And when you're done with your cup, you threw it into one or the other.
Wow.
And in the end, that helped them decide, to quit their jobs and start a hugely successful company. So there are creative ways to get feedback, but I think the key is be aware. If you're going to set an objective as a KPI, be aware of how you're going to measure it before you start the process. Don't do that at the end and say, oh, we set that as a KPI. How are we going to measure? That's why I say the process is as or more important, because even if you never do the final analysis, you'll be better off for all the conversations you had along the way in setting up the framework of your analysis.
It's a really interesting concept. I was looking at a little bit of their website that Niall pulled up as you were talking about it, and it's fascinating to think of the number of ways you can gather opinions. One thing that I do subconsciously, I don't know if this is good or bad, but we do, and he's having trouble listening. Hang in there. My back? We're good. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. We do emailing like most small companies. So we're reaching out to our customer base. Not on purpose, but the number that I look at on a regular basis is the percent of emails opened. And my thinking is they're willing to at least look at the email, then they don't hate us. So I don't know if that's a good objective or I'm holding myself accountable enough, but at least I'm thinking, well, we must be doing good, that we're getting better than a 50% opening rate on. Now they're all people that have opted in on purpose. So I don't know whether that's a good survey or not, but I think we all have to find ways, if we want to hold ourselves accountable as a business, we need some measurement. We've got to come up with some way to measure it.
Absolutely. And on that, whether that email system, that the open rate is a good metric, as long as you don't read too much into it, as long as you don't interpret that, 50% as being the number of people that like you versus those that hate you, what you should be looking at is, what's the trend? Is it getting higher or is it getting lower? If it's going lower, significantly lower, then your audience is disengaging with that email communication. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like you as a business anymore. But it's important to look at that, but also to know not only what it is telling you, but also know what it's not telling you. But yeah, there's the two things you have to look at. You got your own database, so you can communicate with the people that are already engaged with your business. But then part of your objective is probably to bring in new people. So how do you find out what they think? That's a whole different exercise. And it takes creativity. It's sometimes hard to do. And if you've got budget, it's easier than if you don't. But you've got to find a way to do it.
And maybe, like you say, we all go to so many events in the sports world. It's event driven. And there's a way, once you're out at an event, to take, a survey. Or I love the innocent smoothie story. I mean, that's a great thing. One last thing. So KPIs, part of how you run a business and where you're holding yourself and your staff accountable is the reaction to individuals within your business. And we talked about holding each other accountable. And now I'm just talking about, we're measuring internally our staff, our employees. Do you have any ideas on a good way to measure staff? Me, I come from a sales world, and it was always easy. I measured everybody on bookings or shippings, so it was pretty easy. But in a sports facility, that's harder to do.
Yeah, you want to measure their performance, but you also want to measure their attitude or their mindset. And the good thing about, especially if you're a company that has a lot of staff, like I don't know how many temporary or part-time staff do you have at Grand Slam?
So we only have about 4 full-time, but 20 part-time.
Okay, and so but the one thing is, you've got all of their email addresses and probably their phone numbers too. So it's really easy to get feedback from them. So, any business, whether you've got thousands of employees or dozens, you can get feedback from them. You got to decide what you want that to be. Part of it will be their performance, especially if they're sales, because they are generating numbers that you can measure. But you can survey them anytime you want. And I think it's important too to survey them, but also to share with them what your objectives are and maybe some of your KPIs, and give them some incentives to hit those.
I think sometimes owners, entrepreneurs don't know the opinions of some of their best staff until after they've left and started a competitive business. We see that all the time. It's like, I'm leaving, and what are you doing? Well, I'm opening up my own club, or I'm starting a new. What was
the old Covey saying? He was giving an example of bad management or something. He said, "If I want your opinion, I'll give it to you."
Yeah. So there's so many, and we could go on forever about creating KPIs. And I think it's interesting, you're coming from kind of the high end, and some of your time is spent in the NGB world of sports. So you have performance KPIs that are directly tied to the business. U.S. Olympic Committee probably ties a goal of medal count, attendance. There's some things that are easy to count, and we can do that in our business. But then if you're building a legacy-based business, it's maybe a little bit more difficult to get that feedback and track that information. And I think your weighting concept is powerful, and I think that's something that I haven't talked to a lot of small entrepreneurs that do that. They may have 3 things they're shooting for. I don't know anybody that's ever said, I'm waiting, this is number 1, other than maybe profit. I guess I can say profit is number 1 for me.
Okay. Forget just number 1, but by how much?
Yeah.
Is it 55%? Is it 75%? Is it 90%? And do you and Dan and other senior people in the company have the same view on that? Whereas if you independently wrote down your numbers and then compared them, what conversation would that strike? Even if you're 5% off on something, to have the conversation about why you said that, even if neither of you changes your opinion, you now know more about what you're dealing with.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and we'll try to get some feedback on this. So anybody who's listening to this, if you could send us your comments and let us know, what you do. Are we missing something here that you do that we're not aware of? Or is this giving you more thought? And I think we can pick up on this in the future. We're trying to keep this to a limit. We're about at our time limit here, but I think it's a great discussion to dig into, how we're holding each other accountable within a business, how we're holding ourselves accountable to the business. And if you have multiple owners, to make sure that, the mission vision of all owners is lined up and weighted equally, which is a challenge. So in closing, Bruce, any last advice to those of us in the entrepreneur world, that there's a crossover with your world?
Yeah, I wrote an article not too long ago about the fear of measurement and how a lot of people, they don't want to admit it, but they're reluctant to measure properly for fear that they're ultimately going to be judged by that measurement. If you're the owner and the entrepreneur, nobody's judging you, but maybe your investors are. But the point I'm trying to sell and make to people is that if you've got that fear, if you do the measurement in isolation, but if you bring the others on the journey, if you share the conversation with them, whether that's your investors, your board members, your managers, whatever, if you all are part of that conversation from the beginning, then instead of having a jury that's looking at the results and judging you, you end up all coming together and you're part of it. So you're collaborating more and you can actually get rid of that fear of measurement by bringing everybody into the process. Then you're all in it together. And then you're a team. That's where the sports analogy kicks in, because then you become a team. Most teams know we're shooting for the championship. That's easy. But a lot of businesses don't know.
Yeah. And we love getting closer and closer. We're in the business of sport, so team relates to us. And it's one of the reasons we're in this business. And I'm not a plumber, an electrician, or a landscaper. This has more meaning to me. So I think that's great advice. Just in case anybody would like to reach out to you, what's the best way of someone finding you?
I guess on LinkedIn. Yeah.
LinkedIn.
Find me there. Yeah, I'll connect with anybody who's interested and take comments. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Find me, Bruce Cook, on LinkedIn. I don't think there's a lot of us there, but especially in Scotland. But yeah.
And was the fear of measurement, was that a Substack article? Where was that published?
It's on my Substack. It first appeared, it was a guest blog in a sports business website called Unofficial Partner.
Okay.
which is actually, I would highly recommend it. It's very much about the top end of professional sports, but it's highly entertaining and really interesting. Lots of good lessons that you can carry through to any level of business.
Niall, you can include that in the show notes at the end. So we'll put that out. Anybody that wants to read that can go there. And what is your Substack title, tag, whatever?
It is. Oh, you're making me remember now. It's Cook Endeavors.
Cook Endeavors. Great.
Yep.
So Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. We went a little bit over. It's fun. We will do it again, and we'll just keep picking at your brain for what's left of it.
If you want to send over those questions, you could send those over. Playbook at paradigmplaybook.com. If you have anything you want to ask us, you could leave a comment on YouTube as well.
I would say send your questions, but also anybody that says, hey, I'm already doing this, but I'm maybe doing it a different way, or this is what I'm doing. I would love to.
Yeah, we'd love to hear.
Because I don't want to assume that nobody's doing it correctly. A lot of people probably are, and hats off to them.
And Dave and I have always said the purpose of Paradigm Playbook is partially to teach, but partially to learn. And so far, it's been more about learning than teaching. But we're having a good time along the way. So many thanks for joining us, Bruce. We will tie you in again. Everybody, make it a great day.
Help us grow by sharing and tagging the Paradigm Playbook podcast on social media. We value your support.